I've been stuck on how to talk about this topic for a while now, and so I figured, why not just make it simple? Today, I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on Nintendo's current upcoming lineup for the Switch and Switch 2, and why my thoughts are generally more positive on it than most other people. Or at least, why I think that's the case. Like and subscribe, blah blah blah, let's just get into it. So, the simple reason I feel good about the current upcoming lineup is just the fact that there are currently multiple upcoming games that I personally have hype for. I know, very simple, but that's just how it is. We got Tomodachi Life Living the Dream recently. It's only been about a month, and that was a game I've been wanting to get a sequel for years, so that was already good. But then I have the 1-2 punch of getting both Rhythm Heaven Groove and Splatoon Raiders in July, another series I've wanted to see get a new game for a while, and a spin-off of maybe my favorite Nintendo series that will seemingly be based around my favorite mode in Splatoon 3, and so I still got 2 games not out yet to look forward to. Granted, I'm not super interested in Bacopia, Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, or Dustbloods' games, but I still think it's pretty cool that Bacopia attempted to bring Pokemon into a genre the series hasn't really dove into before, and seemingly did very well for itself critically in that regard. On top of that, while I don't have too much interest in playing it right now, I think Star Fox is still an intriguing title to pay attention to see what people will think of it past the surface level impressions of the fact that it's a remake of 64, and the divisiveness of the new designs. What will people think of it strictly in terms of the game, and could it be the start of a renaissance for the franchise? There's also Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, a game that I have some interest in, though I'm not fully sold on buying it yet, but it's still a game I want to see more of in the future. Of course, there's probably someone typing about the rumor-shaped elephant in the room as well, though for the few people who are interested in Nintendo on the internet that want to remain unspoiled, I will not bring it up. Also because of the fact that it's a rumor, so I don't wish to make my argument talking about something that has yet to even be officially announced by Nintendo. The point I'm trying to make here is that I think there's a decent amount of interesting stuff still to come to Switch 1 and 2 that we currently know about, if people are willing to look for it. And therein lies what I will admit this current upcoming lineup's problem really is: the lack of broad appeal from any game in this lineup. I want to preface that point by saying it's not really the fault of the games themselves, and it's not an indictment on their quality to admit that Nintendo's current lineup is largely games that are more niche, especially to an English-speaking audience, which I think we have to acknowledge inherently puts us in a bubble, in that we never have the full picture of what the greater gaming audience actually thinks about certain things. I say this because over in Japan, Splatoon Raiders could maybe be a big thing pulling the weight of this current lineup, given how popular that series is over there, even if it's just a spin-off. However, outside of Japan, while Splatoon is definitely not small by any means, it's still on the more niche side by comparison, and so a Splatoon spin-off might be a harder sell to that audience as this big deal. To put it into an analogy, let's say modern AAA gaming is like the New York Yankees, a team that has a reputation for wanting to mash as many home runs as possible, and therefore becoming seen as a team with this all-or-nothing approach. But on the other hand, those home runs aren't as effective if you're not pushing in additional runs alongside it. I think those home run titles are even more effective if they have a few smaller scale games backing them up for people to try after getting through the major titles. Meanwhile, it feels like Nintendo, at least in my biased view, is more content with bolstering their lineup through a series of singles or doubles, realizing that so long as they're not striking out, this method can be just as, if not more effective at driving in runs than the home run focused strategy. That's not to say that Nintendo doesn't have a home run series, because they definitely have plenty of those. Mario, Zelda, Smash, Pokemon, and Animal Crossing being the 5 big ones right now. And I think that's the thing that makes this lineup feel empty, or some might even say boring. Nintendo's strategy can be effective, no doubt, but it's an admittedly not super flashy way of playing, and one of the things that makes those singles and doubles so effective is that they make the home runs that Nintendo does hit even more valuable by adding more depth to their lineup. And I think that might be why we see all those kinds of videos from Nintendo content creators on how the Switch 2 or Nintendo's lineup right now is boring or not so much is happening. I want to be very careful when bringing up this point, because whenever someone on the internet criticizes something, they are walking a very fine line between genuine constructive criticism and just straight up attacking the thing or person they claim to be criticizing. And most of the time, people on the internet are fully intent on crossing that line. But I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think it was a meaningless point to this discussion. And so, I believe that due to the problem of the lack of broad appeal I mentioned earlier, it's led to videos from notable creators who say this lineup isn't particularly exciting, and that it needs that big oomph, often in the form of a new 3D Mario, maybe a Smash Bros. Or Zelda, depending on the person. Of course, this is an opinion that creators are perfectly entitled to, and as I've said before, I admittedly agree with it in certain aspects, even if I disagree with the opinion as a whole. The problem I've grown to have with the opinion itself, though, is that I feel it does a disservice to these games to strictly talk about them, in terms of how many copies we think they're going to sell, or how much hype it's going to generate. As we are strictly fans, I don't think it should be up to us to be concerned with how the business suits choose to conduct their business. And some might argue that's a silly thing to say, because as fans, should we not be concerned if our favorite company is doing poorly? And to that I reply with a reminder, the corporation is not our friend. The only business they have with us is making a product that we see as good enough to give our hard-earned money to the corporation. Just a reminder to separate the art from the artist, or in this case, business suits. I make this point because it feels like there's been an epidemic of gamers online becoming armchair financial analysts for their console of choice over the past few years. I myself am not above this. I have made multiple videos in the past that slip into this territory, even if it's not necessarily getting into the nitty-gritty of business numbers, and is simply, here's why I like this business strategy. And hell, I've even arguably done it in this video when I made that analogy about AAA gaming earlier. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that it feels more to me that the reason for this behavior is that creators kinda wanna use it as a mask for just telling us what they, and probably their viewers, really want to happen by using the excuse that would be financially optimal. And I think that's what ends up leading to the consistent narratives of the Switch 2 needs a system seller popping up. Because I think a lot of people have this narrative that the Switch 2 doesn't necessarily have its own true home run game yet. Kirby Air Riders was a hype sequel, but still a niche title. DK Bananza is a great game, but not a massive seller, more of a double to maybe triple sales wise. ZA is of course gonna sell since it's Pokemon, but that's also on Switch 1. And Mario Kart World is of course Mario Kart, but it also has an active wallet repellent in the form of it costing $80 standalone, meaning an overwhelming amount of its sales are just from people who got the Switch 2 bundle. To be frank, while I do find some agreement in these talking points, I also think it's an irresponsible way to talk about these games, especially considering the influence some of these creators have. Granted, having influence on the internet is also its own very thin tightrope that those creators have to tread on. Because if they were being like me when I talked about the upcoming lineup, they'd probably be getting called bootlickers right now, and if they act how they do, well then they get people like me making a video like this. It's truly an aspect of their position I don't envy. It almost becomes impossible to say anything without having it be scrutinized in some way. And honestly, I don't think it's entirely their fault that they make stuff like this. Because now, I want to point my attention to what I think is the massive underlying issue behind all of this chatter. The YouTube algorithm. If you're a YouTuber who is able to make it a full-time thing, then you basically become at the mercy of the algorithm, as at any given time, it can flash that 10 of 10 on your latest video and tell you to start filling out the McDonald's job application. I was largely inspired to talk about this topic by this video from Matthew Smart, and it had a point that at the time I fully agreed with, but nowadays I think there's more nuance to it than he puts it in.
I just don't think that their problem is that they don't cater their game lineup towards YouTubers that want to milk views off of them. And that correlates to my big theory where the actual problem lies. I don't think that these YouTubers are creative enough or interesting enough to be able to entertain their audiences on their own without relying on the Nintendo news hype sphere. These channels desperately rely on Nintendo releasing a game that they know will get them tons of views, that any game that doesn't get them big numbers is deemed as lesser than them as a result of that.
Now I think a lot of people would agree that making most of your content about wanting to see the same things get announced is a sign of lack of ability to maintain an audience on your own creative merits. But the algorithm games some of these creators are forced to play doesn't help matters either. And that's where we have to look at their audience. Because the hard truth is, a lot of these creators are not generally watched for their personalities or their analysis, they're watched for the topics they discuss. These guys could probably make the greatest, most thought-provoking video ever conceived, but if it's not about Wahoo Plumber, Hiya Swordman, or gaming characters beating each other up game, they're likely only going to see that video get so many views. that's what the problem is with the YouTube algorithm in my eye. By design, it stifles creators' creativity and encourages them to just reuse the same shit that's been proven to stick to the wall. This goes especially so for those full-time creators, because remember, that also means they need to be churning out videos often and regularly. I know some people dislike the term content creator because it reduces the work of creators into something to be thoughtlessly consumed, but these people are really forced by the algorithm to become content creators in that way. And I think this is probably why a lot of creators who do this style of content have started diving into second channels, as a medium to release their thoughts on topics that they may have interest in, but won't perform the same way in the algorithm. Heck, that is exactly the reason listed in Arlo's second channel description. I don't think these guys are truly like the stereotypical Nintendo fan that gets memed on a lot on the internet. I think that factors out of their control have forced most of them to be like that. And it's a shame, really. It feels like these creators don't get to enjoy their hobby the same way they once did, because now their next paycheck is somewhat dependent on what Nintendo announces, and if it has broad appeal. So to summarize, while I don't think creators are blameless for the way a lot of smaller series are portrayed or viewed, it's hard to entirely fault them considering they're at the mercy of an algorithm that can destroy their audiences and financial security at any moment. And after all, maybe they do genuinely feel this way about these series, in which case, it's as valid an opinion as any other, though I would of course like to see some be more thoughtful in how they speak about these series in that case. Oh yeah, remember when this was a video where I talked about Nintendo's upcoming lineup at one point? Let's get back to that. To conclude, I think that every upcoming Nintendo game we know of, even if you're not interested in playing it, has at least a few interesting questions to talk about that I think make for inherently interesting discussion. I said some of them with Star Fox earlier, but you can just as easily apply that thinking to other games. What bangers will be in Rhythm Heaven, and what new ideas will that game bring to the table? How will Splatoon Raiders be as the series' first spin-off? How will it provide further characterization to Deep Cut that Splatoon 3 sorely lacked? And will it connect into the underlying story of the mainline games? What else do we have to be intrigued by in terms of the story Fire Emblem Fortunes Weave has to tell? We know very little about it. Will Pokemon Winds and Waves actually be given the proper time to cook? I think all of these games have enough intriguing questions to garner their own videos. The problem is that the greater gaming audience, or at least the greater audience for these gaming creators, isn't as likely to tune in for a video about any of these games rather than a hypothetical game from a bigger series, which is a shame as they appeal to the biggest question Nintendo fans have right now. What does the future look like, and when's the big system seller coming? It's a double-edged sword, because it feels like without that home run hitting game, these games are only going to be talked about for what they aren't, something that happens unfortunately often to more niche series, and will be perceived more negatively because of it. However, if we do in fact get said home run titles, that negativity goes away, but then these games get overshadowed by the home run titles. It's this sort of lose-lose situation for fans of these games. As for me personally though, I have my games to be excited for, so I'm personally satisfied right now, and that's all I really need. But anyways, that's all I have to say regarding this topic. Let me switch to the comment engagement bait question of the video. Let me know what upcoming game right now you're most looking forward to, and which series that hasn't gotten a game on Switch 2 yet you most want to see. Thanks for watching, and have a great day. Now watch that supposed direct come next week and render this entire video outdated. This is what I get for taking over a month to finally put this idea to video.